Here's the reality. This equipment means nothing without my presence. It's my legs, my mind, and my talent that create the magic. I apologize to those who purchased the same shoes in hopes of running like me. They won't be able to. Kip Hoffblum's posts were a blend of perfectly arranged gear flat lays, complete, with a trophy for inspiration and his cherished Blue Brooks hat. One could easily picture him sharing these moments, swiftly closing the app, and eagerly anticipating the buzz of notifications on his phone. Kip embodied the spirit of trail running, an example that grit and glory often come hand in hand with a touch of self-importance. You know the type. The individuals, and occasionally women, let's not be biased, who advocate that being an ultra-trail runner transcends mere lifestyle. It's a divine mission. Admittedly, not everyone can endure this challenge. Let's face it, it requires a unique individual to spend countless hours alone on rugged trails, tackling landscapes that would leave most people gasping for breath in mere minutes, while others squander their weekends glued to screens. Ultra runners are out conquering vast stretches of wilderness, showcasing their toughness, speed, and resilience that surpasses 99% of the population. This pursuit goes beyond just running. It's about asserting dominance. It's for folks like Kip, those who refuse to accept anything less than extraordinary and want the world to take notice. And what better way to make a statement? By posting about it. And post he did. Every day, in fact, often multiple times a day. His feed was filled with snapshots of his apparel, supplements, and medals. With a broad smile, Kip stood proudly at the center, surrounded by his so-called followers. Add in a few ambassador shout-outs, some support for efforts to locate a missing female runner, and plenty of coffee cheers, and you had a meticulously crafted social media presence. Kip was gearing up for the Madman 100, a challenging 100-mile Lila trail race. Despite his egotistical nature, sexist attitudes, narrow-minded political views, and questionable tactics to gain attention from women in the running club, people started to notice him. Once he announced his new training cycle, the Wahoos, a local running group, eagerly jumped in to like and comment on his posts. He received invitations to podcasts, and before long, his following on Instagram and Strava skyrocketed. Although preparing for an ultra-marathon is tough, he was thriving in the process. By February, his routine was firmly established, and the winter scenery provided stunning backdrops for his photos. Running in shorts during frigid temperatures? That's the kind of determination that gets shared widely. One morning, after capturing a quick selfie with his breath visible in the cold air and icicles forming in his beard, he set off on a familiar, secluded trail he had traversed countless times. The sign at the trailhead was cluttered with flyers, announcements for upcoming events, missing persons notices, and ads for hunting guides. Kip clearly didn't pay attention to these. Why would he? He was already aware of the races on the horizon, and honestly, they made for a poor setting for any selfie. That morning felt typical, until he spotted her. In the distance, amidst the trees, a woman glided effortlessly, as if she were floating over the uneven ground. While other runners often frequented these woods, there was something unique about her, the way she seemed to disappear just when he thought he could catch up. Her footprints were delicate and small, resembling those of a deer. Further away, her ponytail bounced like a rabbit's tail, ducking for cover. In the weeks that followed, he found himself constantly searching for her. Every few days, Kip would catch a fleeting glimpse of this elusive female runner, her pink hat bobbing through the underbrush. Each time, she remained just out of reach. His heart raced, not from physical exertion, but from excitement. Kip never noticed her car in the parking lot, which meant she must have accessed the trails from another point. He began to park at various trailheads, run at unusual hours, and even burn through his paid time off just to track her down. Ultra running can easily become an obsession, and for him, it or she had taken over his thoughts entirely. The exhaustion from sleepless nights and countless miles was clearly taking its toll on Kip. His pace was diminishing, and his body was protesting with shin splints, blisters, and frostbite. His beard had grown wild and gray, and he could see in the rearview mirror that his eyes held a frantic glint. With Lay. Then in early March, Kip caught sight of her once more. This time she appeared more distinct, her figure sharper as she drew nearer. She paused, waved at him, and then vanished into the trees. His heart raced as he quickly parked his truck, leaving the keys inside. Familiar with these trails like the back of his hand, he dashed off to intercept her at the bridge. That morning, a thick mist enveloped the forest, muffling Kip's footsteps as he hurried closer. However, the nearer he got, the more unsettled he became. Light filtering through the trees can be eerie, and as he moved swiftly, Kip couldn't shake the feeling that darkness was encroaching on the trail, despite the absence of clouds or a canopy above. The bare branches of the trees seemed to twitch, unnaturally, almost as if they were reaching out towards him. High above, large black birds sat perched, observing his every move. As he reached the cutoff near the bridge, Kip finally closed the gap. Just ahead lay his prize, the runner. He could now see her entire form gliding effortlessly, her feet barely grazing the ground. Suddenly, her shape began to distort in an unsettling manner, bending and flickering like something from a nightmare. Her movement wasn't quite running or walking, but rather an erratic rhythm that both captivated Kip and filled him with dread. As her image flickered in and out before him, reminiscent of a television struggling for a signal, she seemed to merge into a tangled mass of bushes and underbrush. When Kip finally came to a halt, reaching her, the harsh truth struck him like a punch. She was lifeless. She had transcended humanity. What Kip encountered was a decayed body, grotesquely ensnared in the twisted limbs of an ancient oak tree. She remained in her running attire, her vibrant clothes now muted by layers of moss and dirt, even the once bright pink hat. She had been lost to time, consumed by nature, forgotten by all. The only motion was the soft swaying of her hair, caught, yet flowing freely in the cool breeze. Kip staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the rapid thumping of his heart and the low rustling of the trees groaning in the wind. He turned and dashed toward his truck, his mind racing. He couldn't comprehend what he had just witnessed, and wasn't sure he wanted to. Had this woman, this runner, ever truly existed here? Had he been chasing nothing all along? Who was it that he was pursuing? These questions swirled in his mind as he struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. Moving quickly, Kip began to repeat a mantra to himself. Kip runs fast. Kip runs fast. But now, the trails appeared darker, the paths overgrown. He had traversed this area before, yet he found himself lost. Trees he had previously overlooked blocked his way, and the familiar grooves in the spring mud seemed to have become overrun with grass. The mile markers were distorted, or the numbers no longer made sense. The woods stretched on endlessly. More than once he rounded a bend and spotted the woman, with sun-bleached hair still ensnared in the branches of the tree. As he opened his mouth to scream, his voice vanished, perhaps drowned out by the furious cawing of the crows observing the scene. All he could do was keep moving as darkness enveloped him. Those who followed Kip received a new post, accompanied by a photo of a man curled up in a fetal position within a thicket of brambles. Clutching himself, he held his phone, which glowed like a beacon amidst the tangled grass. I've been running forever. No end. She's still here. I'm still here. I'm about to hop on a freight train at the station, my lord. I'm indifferent to its destination. I plan to scale a mountain. The tallest peak. I'll leap off, and no one will know. The Marshall Tucker Band. I'm filled with rage. I truly gave it my all. The road leading from the army base where we currently reside stretches westward toward that plundered Costco near Corvallis, cluttered with abandoned vehicles and trucks, all decaying, tires deflated, gas caps left ajar. I'm familiar with every detour needed to navigate around them, yet there are always unpredictable obstacles. They refer to it as the law of unintended consequences. That seems to be my fate. I've become an unintended consequence myself. Perhaps. That's not entirely accurate. My thoughts aren't very clear at the moment. Molly is in the same boat. My Staffordshire Terrier. She might also be considered an unintended consequence, perhaps. Honestly, I feel worse about her in the end. I adored Molly so deeply. Those little bastards. I despise them intensely, and now I find myself becoming one of them. The old Toyota 4Runner was running surprisingly well despite the poor quality of the remaining fuel, only stalling briefly a few times during the journey, but never completely, shutting down. Upon arriving at the parking lot, I parked by the loading docks just like I always do. I grabbed the modified Remington 12 gauge and tucked the box of pumpkin balls into my jacket pocket. Typically, I would leave the driver's side door open, but this time I had to keep Molly inside. There was no way I was taking her in there. Back door of the Costco was still propped open, just as it usually is, and I spotted the worn-out orange hand truck sitting in the corner. Just like always, everything appeared to be as it typically is. I couldn't hear anything, but I kept the shotgun aimed straight ahead as I stepped onto the store floor from the back room. I flicked on the small flashlight attached to the barrel with some electrical tape and squinted into the shadows. I counted to 15, then waited another 15 seconds before stepping inside. I left the hand truck right where it was and moved forward cautiously. Today was my turn to handle this task, and I never complained when it was my time, but with Kaylee being my only child left, I needed to return to her soon. There was no need to rush. I just had to complete my job and get back home. Right now, though, I was filled with anger. I really messed things up. I grabbed a can of baked beans from the nearest shelf and tossed it as far as I could down one of the aisles. Then I shuffled back a few steps to see what would happen, straining to hear any footsteps and preparing to flee if too many approached. Silence surrounded me. I waited for another 15 seconds, then moved ahead. Before long, I had stacked the first load of supplies on the hand truck. I left it there and shone my flashlight around the back room while keeping my shotgun ready, then briefly checked the back parking lot to ensure everything was all right outside. Noticing nothing alarming, I quietly took the first load of supplies out and loaded them into the back of the 4Runner. When I came back in, I repeated all the same safety measures. I didn't take anything for granted. Once again, everything appeared clear, so I proceeded to gather the remaining supplies. In total, I collected canned goods, batteries, bottled water and juice, toilet paper, napkins, Tylenol, garbage bags, t-shirts, vitamins, and a few other essentials. By that point, there wasn't much left at that Costco, but we avoided venturing further into the more densely populated urban areas unless absolutely necessary. Once more, I checked the back room and the parking lot before carefully wheeling the hand truck out through the loading dock door and loading everything into the back of the old Toyota SUV as quietly as I could. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash coming from the back entrance of the Costco store. It had a metallic ring to it, like a bucket or trash can had been knocked over. For a brief moment, I aimed my shotgun in that direction before hopping into the driver's seat of the Toyota and speeding away. I had secured what I needed, and Molly was barking uncontrollably. The journey back to the base would take at least 5 or 6 hours, possibly more, and I had already spent a similar amount of time just getting there earlier that day. I knew I would need to refuel from the tanks in the back soon. Although I was eager to keep going, the onset of rain made me realize that the trip would be longer and far more perilous. I needed to reconsider my strategy. I had a location in mind. It was crucial for me to return to Kaylee rather than rushing back immediately. I understood she would be anxious if I didn't make it home that night, but that was certainly preferable to not returning at all. My sister Amy would do her best to comfort her. I wasn't looking forward to spending the night either, but I knew Amy would look after her until I arrived with the supplies. As I mentioned, I had a spot in mind. It was just beyond a highway exit sign for Langhorne Avenue, which had a red letter, X, spray painted across it. That symbol is widely recognized. Just past that exit, along the roadside before reaching Redmond, there's a small resting area we occasionally use when necessary. It has proven to be a safe haven. Once it was a minor electrical substation, a compact 8 by 12 steel structure about 10 feet tall that housed some power transmission gear. At some point, someone stripped it down, and you can still see the old rusting components outside the door, with tall grass growing through the cracks. I maneuvered the Toyota to park in front of that old substation, keeping the engine running while I stayed inside for a bit, scanning the area with my binoculars for any signs of life. The sky was overcast and the sun was dipping below the horizon, but I didn't spot anything alarming. Eventually, I decided to grab the shotgun in my travel bag, stepping out of the SUV as quietly and carefully as I could. I left the driver's side door ajar, even though it was drizzling lightly. I wanted to minimize noise, knowing that being able to make a quick getaway could be crucial. Once Molly and I were inside the dilapidated substation, I swiftly shut the door behind me and secured it with zip-tie bundled rebar bolts. Standing by the door with my shotgun in hand, I listened intently for any sounds outside, but after a while I began to relax a little. They tend to shy away from the rain, but you can never be too sure. The sight of the grimy old mattress was a relief. I settled down and enjoyed a cold can of Chef Boyardee ravioli, savoring each bite. It felt like a real treat. I also had some dog food and water for Molly, who seemed just as pleased. Afterward, I spread my sleeping bag out on the mattress, and we drifted off to sleep, lulled by the gentle sound of rain tapping against the steel roof. It was quite comforting. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by Molly's growling and barking. She was positioned by the door, and I could hear screams and scratching noises coming from the other side. Grabbing my shotgun, I pulled Molly back, my heart racing as I hoped the door would hold firm. I checked the rebar bolts. The door appeared sturdy. As time passed, the rain intensified, and the terrifying sounds outside gradually subsided. I set the shotgun aside and returned to bed, struggling to fall asleep again as I stared into the darkness for what felt like an eternity. It all started just over 3 years ago at a facility hidden in the northern Montana woods, where they kept and experimented on children exposed to experimental biochemical weapons from various global locations. Everything was fine there, until it wasn't. During that chaotic time, the news reports were often confusing and sometimes contradictory. They mainly indicated that children were receiving a daily antivirus treatment, but one day, the supply, unexpectedly, ran out. By the next morning, chaos erupted at the facility. Blood everywhere and the fences were breached. What no one realized until that moment was that the virus was contagious. Most individuals beyond their teenage years quickly fell victim to it, though some managed to resist. The reasons behind this remain a mystery. Everything unfolded rapidly, and then, just like that, it was all gone. Everything. The world has changed dramatically since then, especially in this region. I can't really speak for other places. We no longer get any news updates. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep and woke up a few hours later with Molly snuggled beside me. I gave her some kibble for breakfast, grabbed a granola bar for myself, drank some water, and packed up my gear. Before stepping out of the substation's safety with Molly at my side, I peered through the 2 small peepholes. The rain had ceased, but the sky remained overcast and dreary. I suppose I made too much noise while unbolting and opening the door. As soon as we stepped outside, I heard sounds coming from behind the substation and from the low rooftop above. They must have been lurking there all night long. I never knew they could do that. I thought they would retreat into the woods once their hunt was over. Molly paid the price for my mistake, not me. I despise myself for that. I truly hate myself. As the attackers lunged at me, I fired my shotgun twice, hitting 2 of them square in the chest and taking them down. They were both teenage boys, completely naked and filthy, with long, sharp nails and teeth and wild, unkempt hair, moving with a predatory grace. Sadly, there were still 3 more who pounced on Molly, 2 adults and a child. I was ready to fire again, but they were all over her. And believe me, she was fighting back fiercely like a beast, but I couldn't see any way to shoot without hitting her too. After a few moments, it dawned on me that she wouldn't survive much longer anyway, so I emptied my remaining 4 shells into them, including Molly. I was filled with rage, yet tears started streaming down my face immediately. The anger still simmers within me. Those little monsters forced me to kill Molly. As I trudged toward the driver's side door of the Toyota, my head lowered and eyes fixed on the grass through my tear-streaked vision, that's when the last one attacked. He was just a small child, maybe around 10 years old. Perhaps that's why he hesitated while the others charged in. Who can really say? It's hard to understand their mindset. I suppose I'll find out soon enough. It's already beginning. He came around from behind the lift gate and lunged at me, sinking his teeth into my forearm. It was just a quick bite, before I turned and struck him in the forehead with the butt of my Remington. But once I got inside the Forerunner and shut the door, I noticed he had drawn blood. I wiped it off with my bandana and doused it with rubbing alcohol. I felt scared, yet I still held on to a glimmer of hope. I crossed my fingers, clinging to that hope. However, that hope quickly evaporated during the drive back to the base. Now, I feel nauseous, truly sick, and it's only getting worse. My head is beginning to throb, and I feel a wave of nausea coming on. My teeth, gums, fingernails, and toenails are all starting to hurt. My vision is becoming blurry, and my throat feels parched. I'm making some involuntary growling noises, and I can't seem to loosen my grip on the steering wheel. I'm holding on with all my might. All I want is to leap out of this Toyota and run away, no matter where it leads me. I had intended to simply drop off these supplies at the base's front gates and leave, but it's still a 2-hour drive ahead of, and I'm terrified of who or what I might become by the time I arrive. I think I need to turn around right now and drive as far away in the opposite direction as I can. I've reloaded the Remington and am keeping it close by. I'm sweating and drooling heavily now. I can't help it. My clothes are becoming increasingly uncomfortable. I might have to pull over soon to take off my shirt and boots, maybe even my jeans. I don't think I can endure this much longer. I keep glancing at the woods lining the roadside. I just want to dash into the trees. I want to scream. I crave something fresh and alive to eat. Mostly, I just want to put an end to this before it escalates. The thought that I'll never see Kaylee again makes me feel even worse than what happened to Molly. I know my sister Amy will look after her well, but it doesn't ease my discomfort. I keep staring at the woods and then at the Remington. I just need to keep driving for a little while longer. The radio stations went silent years ago, leaving only one old CD stuck in the dashboard stereo of this Toyota for company. The Marshall, Tucker Band, so I crank up the volume. What other choice do I have? The engine's hum is pounding in my head, yet the lyrics resonate with me. I'm gonna find me a hole in the wall. I'm gonna crawl inside and die. Nope, I don't think that's the case. That would be way too simple. I have a feeling I'm going to go down fighting, and you can bet I'll take some of you little punks with me. Brace yourselves for these 12-gauge pumpkin rounds. It's not going to be a pretty sight. I'm planning to slice some of you little monsters in half while I've still got the chance. I'll take out as many of you as I can until I run out of bullets. I owe it to Kaylee, Molly, Amy, and all the rest. I spot a bright red X spray-painted on the exit sign ahead. I'll be there before long. You'll know when I show up, you little bastards. Believe me, you will know. Tristan swirled the unappetizing green tea in his mug, observing the tea bag float aimlessly in the murky liquid. After taking a sip, he grimaced and let out a grunt of distaste. Instead of being enjoyable, it reminded him of damp grass and lingering disappointment. With a heavy sigh, he exited the break room and stepped into the office hallway, pressing the elevator button with the same weary resignation he had shown when pouring his third cup that morning. The reflective elevator doors showcased a man who looked worn out. His tired eyes and perpetually frowning mouth told a story. He tried to ignore the strands of premature gray hair that were creeping over his ears. Taking another sip of his matcha, he forced himself to swallow, attempting not to think about how much it resembled something he once scraped off his lawnmower's wheels. He let out a deep sigh as he glanced at his watch. His morning had been filled with back-to-back meetings, where he felt more like an observer than a participant, silently jotting down notes while higher-ups rambled on for an hour without actually saying anything meaningful. Just a few more years. He reminded himself for what felt like the millionth time. A few more years of proving yourself, then you'll be promoted to manager, then director, and then you'll have made it. He took another sip of the matcha and grimaced again, caught between the urge to swallow or spit it out. It took him a moment to notice the elderly man who had come to stand next to him, also waiting for the elevator. The bite. Old man glanced sideways at Tristan and smiled. Just switched to tea, huh? Tristan forced himself to swallow and nodded. Yeah. The old man chuckled and remarked, that expression on your face. Oof. You're definitely a coffee person, right? Tristan studied the old man's features. He appeared ancient, probably nearing 90. However, he wasn't a senior executive or part of the board. Tristan had memorized all their faces. Not particularly interested in engaging in small talk with a random stranger, he simply nodded. Thought so. The old man continued casually. Let me guess. It wasn't your idea. Tristan frowned at the tea in his hand and replied, My girlfriend suggested it. Another young pup just following orders. The old man laughed again. It's a pity you don't know how to think for yourself. Tristan felt slight irritation at the comment, but he didn't want to make a scene at work by confronting the man. So he chose to keep quiet and took another sip of his matcha. The elderly gentleman glanced at him with disappointment, shaking his head. Nothing? What a shame. I thought you had more courage than that. Turning to face the man, Tristan furrowed his brows and clenched his fist in frustration. What's your issue? He shot back angrily. The old man chuckled. Now that's the spirit. I knew there was still some fight left in you. He playfully poked Tristan in the chest and laughed again. Tristan grimaced and turned away towards the elevator, irritated by how long it was taking. You'll be here forever if you just stand around, the old man remarked. Feel free to take the stairs, Tristan retorted sharply. I'm not talking about the elevator, kid, the old man said, suddenly serious. Your ambitions, your aspirations. I assume you have some. Let me tell you, no one ever achieved anything by simply waiting. You need to go out and find it yourself. Well, nobody's told me where else to look yet, Tristan replied coldly. And you're just sitting around waiting for someone to show you the way, huh? Expecting the world to hand everything to you? That's the issue with your generation. You think dreams just materialize on their own. Tristan let out a frustrated breath, tired of being lectured by this irrelevant stranger. He opened his mouth, ready to express his thoughts to the old man. Then something pressed against his chest. It was a crumpled piece of paper, aged and worn. Lucky for you, kid, the old man whispered conspiratorially. That's exactly how your world operates today. What is this? Tristan asked suspiciously, his anger quickly shifting to confusion. He cautiously unfolded a corner of the paper, which looked like garbage to him. He began to wonder if the old man was simply out of his mind. That, young man, is a map, the old man explained, pointing at the paper. A map leading to a priceless treasure. I can see you're not quite where you want to be in life. Follow that map and it will change your life forever. This has to be a joke, right? Tristan questioned. You're giving me a treasure map? What is this, Uncharted? It's all right, young one, the old man chuckled. I was skeptical too when a stranger handed me that thing. It took me 37 years to take it seriously. I wasted so much time. But if I had known back then what I know now, I wouldn't have hesitated for even a moment. The deep sincerity in the man's voice made Tristan feel uneasy, yet he couldn't shake off the thrill that surged through him. Even if the man was a bit eccentric, this was the most captivating experience he had ever encountered. So why not go along with it? All right then, Tristan said, carefully unfolding the so-called map and deciding to indulge the man for the time being. What's this reward? And why didn't you claim it yourself? No, young man, I did claim it, the old man asserted. Everyone has their own reward. The map you're holding will lead you to a location that isn't marked on any other map. From There, it will guide you through the maze. Maze? Tristan echoed, still uncertain whether he should take this seriously. Yes, or more accurately, a labyrinth. The map will direct you to the center, where you can obtain your personal reward, but there's a catch. You must pay it forward. Tristan gazed down at the map in his hands. It was delicate, worn out, and filled with creases, making it seem like it could disintegrate at any moment. As the elevator dinged to signal its arrival, the old man turned to leave. What you choose to do next is entirely up to you, but here's some free advice. Don't spend half your life pondering it. In the days that followed, Tristan kept convincing himself that the old man was delusional. Treasure map? Absurd, yet a part of him was undeniably curious. This curiosity only grew when he inquired around the office about the old man, and no one seemed to recognize him. He couldn't quite pinpoint why he ultimately decided to heed the old man's words, but Tristan packed his bags and set off on his quest. He didn't inform anyone of his destination. He used up all his vacation days and then departed. After weeks of traveling, all his doubts about the map faded away as he arrived at the place it pointed to. Tristan found himself in a secluded valley as the sun dipped below the horizon, marveling at the imposing, shadowy walls that loomed before him. They extended endlessly to both sides, merging with the fading light and reaching up into the darkening sky. An enormous archway loomed above Tristan, resembling a gaping mouth that signified the entrance to this mysterious place. He half expected a bolt of lightning to strike the sky. How could such a monumental structure remain hidden? Who had constructed it and for what purpose? These inquiries, along with countless others, swirled in Tristan's mind like a tempest, but they felt irrelevant at that moment. Not when he was standing so close. He had been skeptical that this journey would lead to anything significant, yet now there was no denying its importance. Tristan flipped the map over in his hands, examining the back and corners for further instructions, but found nothing. The old man had assured him that the map would also lead him to the heart of the labyrinth, yet he saw no clues to guide him onward. "Find me," a voice suddenly floated on the breeze. Tristan jumped, nearly ripping the map in two. He spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the field was empty. There wasn't a soul in sight. "Find me," the voice called again, more insistent this time. Realizing where the voice originated, Tristan turned once more. It was emanating from within the labyrinth, a sound carried by the wind that seemed to rise from its very depths. Steeling himself, Tristan took a cautious step into the labyrinth. The world seemed to exhale, and everything fell silent. Casting a glance over his shoulder, Tristan's face drained of color. The massive archway he had just entered through had vanished. In its place stood a section of wall made of flat, dark stones that towered above him, disappearing into the sky. Tristan stumbled forward, pressing his hand against the wall, pushing hard while his breath quickened. No, he muttered anxiously, feeling around the wall desperately for an escape route, but found none. After a few minutes of unsuccessful attempts, Tristan settled down in the dirt with his back against the wall, pondering his next move. He took several slow, deep breaths to help calm his rising panic. As he relaxed, he began to survey his surroundings. 3 paths lay before him, one to the left, one to the right, and one straight ahead. Each path faded into shadows. Tristan glanced at the ineffective map he was holding. To his surprise, it had transformed. The previous instructions that guided him to the labyrinth's entrance were gone, replaced by a detailed illustration of the labyrinth itself. As he observed, the drawing seemed to expand, with black lines appearing as if drawn by unseen hands. In awe, Tristan watched as the ink filled the page, revealing an elaborate spider's web design, with a large empty square at its center. "Find me," the voice echoed again. It sounded familiar, yet he couldn't quite place it. Tristan swallowed hard, trying to comprehend the situation, then nodded once as if reassuring himself to press on. The map clearly indicated the labyrinth's center, and he noticed tiny dots tracing a path to his left. Without hesitation, Tristan turned and followed the directions, moving quickly but cautiously into the hidden depths. As he adhered to the map's guidance, Tristan frequently heard stones grinding and could swear that the map changed slightly each time he glanced at it. There was no way to know what lay in the other corridors, but he could hear things. They lurked in the darkness, stomping and slithering just out of sight. He was convinced they could hear him too, perhaps even catch his scent. The thought of straying down the wrong path sent shivers down his spine. After hours of wandering, Tristan reached a point where his path diverged into two corridors. The map clearly instructed him to go right, yet he felt an intense urge to venture left instead. He had no idea what awaited him down that route, and there was no logical reason to stray from the safe path, but the temptation was nearly irresistible. He took a single step toward the left, gazing longingly into the darkness. There's something extraordinary down there, he mused. The peculiar force beckoning him felt as comforting as returning home after a lengthy absence. It drew him in, not through words, but in a way that resonated within him like an unrecognized thought, a memory he had never experienced. Yet it was just as shadowy as any other route, and completely, eerily silent. Still, Tristan could almost convince himself that the air felt warmer along that path. He took another step forward, envisioning the marvels that might await him. "Come find me," the voice urged again, this time more pronounced. Tristan jolted back to reality. He pivoted and hurried along the route indicated by the map, already dismissing the tempting detour that had lured him. Tristan lost track of how long he had been walking. It felt like an eternity. He turned a corner and noticed the vast hall expanding, revealing a brilliant silver light. He gasped softly as he realized he had reached the heart of the labyrinth. He had arrived. Stumbling ahead, Tristan dropped to his knees on the grass before a raised platform that signified the maze's center. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he surveyed his rather ordinary surroundings. The only feature in the courtyard was the platform before him, and the tall, gleaming object perched atop it. The light appeared to radiate from the object itself. It boasted an intricate silver frame that sparkled enticingly. Within the frame was a simple full-length mirror. Tristan gazed up at the mirror, confusion growing within him. Was this truly it? Was this the treasure? "Come find me," the voice urged, once more, this time with greater urgency. Tristan flinched at the sound, which was louder than ever before. It seemed to emanate from the mirror itself. Now that he was so near, Tristan recognized the voice. It was his own, calling out from the mirror with an intense plea. Goosebumps prickled his arms and the nape of his neck as Tristan stared wide-eyed at the mirror. Its surface shimmered like a tranquil pond reflecting the glow of a full moon. Slowly, he approached, eyes fixed on the glass as he climbed onto the stone platform and positioned himself in front of the mirror. When he caught sight of his reflection, Tristan gasped. Instead of seeing his own reflection, Tristan was confronted by a peculiar yet recognizable face. The elderly man from the office, who had urged him to embark on this journey, appeared in the mirror, gazing at Tristan with an intense and ravenous stare. "Hey there, young blood, you found me," the old man said with a smirk, using Tristan's voice. "What? How?" Tristan stuttered, bewildered. What's going on?" A chilling sensation suddenly enveloped Tristan's chest. He gasped in shock, pressing a hand against his heart as he stumbled, nearly collapsing to his knees. When he looked up, he noticed the old man in the mirror starting to transform. His white hair gradually regained color, turning into a rich light brown and becoming fuller. The deep lines on his face began to smooth out, and his skin regained its youthful texture. Tristan glanced down at his own hands, and his breath hitched in his throat. Before his eyes, his skin was withering, losing color rapidly, while his fingers curled like brittle branches. His veins pressed against thin, fragile skin, leaving his hands weak and trembling. "Help," Tristan croaked, looking back at the old man in the mirror. But the old man no longer appeared aged. As Tristan continued to watch, finally sinking to his knees as his legs gave way, He realized that the old man had transformed into someone much younger in mere moments. What truly terrified Tristan was the realization that the youthful face belonged to him. He reached up, touching his face with shaking fingers. His cheeks felt sunken, and the skin around his neck and jawline seemed to sag loosely. "Sorry, young blood," the figure in the mirror said, now sporting Tristan's features. "You should have searched for yourself. The road not taken, right?" Suddenly, Tristan felt an unseen force begin to draw him toward the mirror. He screamed and clawed at the stone platform beneath him, desperately seeking something to hold on to. As he was pulled closer to the mirror, his screams grew louder. His eyes wide with terror in his suddenly aged face. He attempted to crawl away, but the invisible force was overpowering, and his frail body was too weak to resist. As Tristan glanced back, a wave of horror washed over him when his feet made contact with the mirror. Instead of encountering solid glass, they seemed to dissolve into it, as if he were submerging into a pitch-black sea. In a panic, Tristan let out an even louder scream, thrashing about in a desperate attempt to free himself. He fought to grasp onto anything within reach, digging his fingers into any crevice in the stones he could find. His nails broke off as he was pulled with an overwhelming force, leaving thin streaks of blood on the stone as he continued to claw for salvation. The figure in the mirror, now an exact replica of Tristan, observed as he gradually sank deeper into the reflective surface. Throughout this ordeal, Tristan's screams echoed, and he struggled fiercely as he first submerged up to his knees, then his waist. Even as he found himself engulfed up to his chest, his cries persisted. Ultimately, silence fell when his head disappeared into the mirror, though one hand remained visible, bloodied and frail, desperately searching for something to hold on to until that too vanished. Once the courtyard of the labyrinth returned to silence, the man who had assumed Tristan's appearance pressed his hands against the mirror's surface and effortlessly stepped through, emerging into the cool air. He turned to gaze back at the mirror, admiring his new reflection. With a sly grin, he smoothed down his freshly styled hair. Then, noticing the ancient map on the ground, he bent down, picked it up and tucked it into his jacket pocket with a satisfied smile. Finally, he turned away and strolled off, whistling nonchalantly as he melted into the shadows.